It was May 15th, 2011, in Brisbane, Australia. 20-year-old Acton Beale had just come home to his apartment in Kangaroo Point after a night out with a friend. He was in good spirits. Like many his age, Acton enjoyed social media and liked participating in online trends. One of the biggest at the time was planking. Planking involves lying face down, stiff like a board, in unusual or unexpected places, arms by your sides, body flat. Someone takes a photo and it's posted online. It started harmlessly. People planked on benches, couches, or floors. But soon, the trend escalated. People began planking on fences, rooftops, moving vehicles, anywhere they could gain more attention. The riskier the location, the more views and likes it brought. That morning, Acton decided to plank on the railing of his 7th-floor balcony. The ledge was just 5 centimeters wide, not even 2 inches. It was barely wide enough to stand on, let alone lie down. Still, he went for it. His friend later told police they had tried several planking spots earlier that night. This was the last one. According to Queensland Police Deputy Commissioner Ross Barnett, Acton was trying to position himself on the narrow ledge when he lost his balance. He fell 7 stories. People nearby heard the sound of the fall, but didn't know what had happened. Paramedics arrived quickly and worked on Acton for nearly 20 minutes, but it was too late. He didn't survive. This became the first known death linked directly to planking. Until then, the trend had been viewed as silly and reckless, but not truly dangerous. That perception changed overnight. Police confirmed that Acton had been drinking earlier that night. Barnett later spoke to the media. He explained that planking itself wasn't illegal or always unsafe. It could be done safely in homes or parks. The danger, he said, came from people pushing the limits to gain attention. In the days before Acton's death, Queensland police had already arrested a man for planking on a police car. He was charged with trespassing. Officials in both Queensland and Victoria had issued warnings about the risks. People had been spotted planking on rooftops, railroad tracks, and even on moving vehicles. Authorities were concerned about how far some were willing to go for a photo. Acton's death made headlines across Australia and around the world. Prime Minister Julia Gillard called it really tragic and urged people to understand the difference between safe fun and life-threatening choices. On Facebook, a tribute page called R.I.P. Acton Beale was created. Friends and strangers posted messages calling him kind, adventurous, and full of life. Unfortunately, trolls soon flooded the page with hateful comments and memes mocking the incident. One video even made fun of his death. It was removed, but the damage was done. The comments section was later shut down to prevent further harm. The wider planking community faced backlash. Some defended the trend, saying most people planked safely. Others admitted it had gone too far. Deputy Commissioner Barnett warned that the more people tried to outdo each other, the greater the danger. Acton Beale was just 20. His story became a sobering reminder of how fast a viral trend can turn deadly, and how the pressure for online attention can sometimes push people past the point of no return. Jimmy Hesseldon was a man who had already defied the odds long before his name ever hit headlines in 2010. Born and raised in a working-class family in Leeds, England, he left school at 15 and began his life as a coal miner. Hardly the sort of origin story you'd expect from a future multimillionaire and philanthropist. But Hesseldon wasn't just another face in the crowd. After being laid off during the miners' strike in the 1980s, he put his severance money to use by inventing and selling a portable barrier system known as the Hesco Bastion. It wasn't glamorous, but it revolutionized military and flood defense infrastructure and made him incredibly wealthy in the process. Far from hoarding his fortune, Hesseldon gave millions to charity, including generous donations to his hometown, medical research, and veterans support. He was well-respected, humble, and often described as someone who never forgot his roots. In 2010, he made an interesting business move. He bought Segway Inc., the company behind the futuristic-looking two-wheeled electric scooters that had become something of a punchline in pop culture, but still held real potential in niche transport markets. Owning Segway wasn't just a quirky investment. Hesseldon was genuinely interested in clean, efficient transportation. Tragically, that interest would soon lead to the very incident that made his name a headline around the world for a reason no one could have ever predicted. On the morning of September 26, 2010, Jimmy was riding a rugged off-road Segway X2 on his estate near the River Wharf in West Yorkshire. The property featured pathways and cliffside trails, some of which overlooked the river. At some point during the ride, reportedly while trying to give space to a passing dog walker on a narrow trail, he reversed the Segway, perhaps misjudging the edge, and lost his balance. In a heartbreaking turn of events, the machine and its owner went over the cliff, tumbling nearly 30 feet down into the riverbank below. Emergency services responded quickly, but Hesseldon was pronounced dead at the scene. The news struck with a bizarre and chilling irony. How could the man who owned Segway die while riding one? The media, of course, latched on to the unusual circumstances, and headlines across the world ran with a tone of disbelief, often skirting the line between shock and sensationalism. But beyond the tragic twist of fate, the story was that of a generous and deeply grounded man whose legacy deserved far more than punchlines. The inquest later confirmed that the incident was purely accidental. There were no signs of foul play or mechanical failure, just a tragic misstep in an otherwise normal morning. It's one of those real-life events that sounds like dark fiction. A man who spent his life building safety systems and promoting innovation, only to be undone by a single moment of imbalance. But Jimmy Hesseldon's story shouldn't be defined solely by how he died. It should be remembered for how he lived. From the coal mines to corporate boardrooms, from humble beginnings to multi-million-pound donations, he lived with purpose and generosity. His death may have drawn headlines because of its unusual nature, but his life earned respect for far more meaningful reasons. In the end, Jimmy wasn't just the guy who died on a Segway. He was a self-made inventor, a business leader, and a philanthropist who helped shape communities and save lives. And that's the legacy worth remembering. On December 25, 2024, what should have been a routine flight turned into a disaster. Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243, an Embraer 190, departed from Baku, Azerbaijan, bound for Grozny, Russia, carrying 67 people, minus 62 passengers and 5 crew members. Within 2 hours, tragedy would unfold, leaving 38 dead and 29 forever changed. The flight took off on schedule that Christmas morning. Weather conditions were less than ideal, but still within acceptable limits. For the first 40 minutes, all was calm. Captain Igor Shakin and First Officer Alexander Konov, both seasoned pilots, kept the flight steady while Chief Flight Attendant Hakuma Aleva and her team ensured passenger comfort. Trouble began as the aircraft neared Russian airspace. Suddenly, the GPS navigation system failed. Experts would later determine the likely cause: military-grade GPS jamming, a known issue in geopolitically tense areas. Though unsettling, the pilots continued, switching to backup navigation systems. Russian air traffic control gave clearance to land at Grozny, but a heavy fog blanketing the airport made visibility nearly impossible. After 2 aborted landing attempts, the pilots made the decision to turn back to Baku. But as the plane reversed course, 81 minutes into the flight, disaster struck. A sudden explosion shook the fuselage, followed by chaos. Passengers screamed, oxygen masks deployed, and debris tore through the cabin. Flight attendant Aiden Rahim would later describe the moment as pure terror. A second explosion ripped through the aircraft, injuring flight attendant Zulfugar Asadov, who continued assisting passengers despite being wounded. At first, the crew suspected a bird strike or engine malfunction, but with systems rapidly failing and the plane becoming harder to control, they realized this was far more serious. The pilots turned the aircraft toward Owa, Kazakhstan, hoping to make an emergency landing. As they crossed the Caspian Sea, the aircraft's altitude and speed fluctuated dangerously. They attempted to land at Owa International Airport. On their first pass, visibility and control problems forced a go-around. On the second attempt, the plane never made it. Just 3 kilometers from the runway, the right wing clipped the ground. The aircraft broke apart, tumbling across a field before bursting into flames. The crash site was horrific. Flames, smoke, and twisted metal scattered across the field. Emergency responders worked frantically, pulling injured survivors from the wreckage. One video showed a woman crying out for help, trapped under debris. Of the 67 aboard, 38 were killed, including both pilots and Chief Flight Attendant Aleva. Her final words over the intercom were, "Everything will be fine." Her family later said she died doing what she loved, caring for others. The 29 survivors suffered broken bones, burns, and deep psychological scars. Among them were 2 children, both traumatized but alive. As investigators combed through the site, they made a shocking discovery: missile fragments near the wreckage. Analysis pointed to a surface-to-air missile, likely from a Panzer S-1 defense system. Survivors had heard multiple blasts before the aircraft lost control. Initially, Russia denied any involvement, but under growing international pressure, The Kremlin issued a statement of regret, calling it a tragic incident. Though never officially confirmed, the evidence strongly indicated a mistaken military strike. For the victims and survivors, that Christmas Day became a haunting symbol of how quickly ordinary life can turn to catastrophe, especially in the shadow of global tensions. It was the morning of April 6, 2022, in the quiet town of Roselville, Wisconsin. Tanya Rodriguez, 44, and James Karolfi, 52, were spending time in their garage working on what had recently become a shared hobby. They had taken an interest in a technique called fractal wood burning, a method that uses high-voltage electricity to etch lightning-like patterns into wood soaked in a chemical solution. The results can be beautiful and mesmerizing. These electrified designs, resembling branching trees or veins of lightning, have become popular on social media platforms, especially TikTok. But what many viewers don't see behind the viral videos is just how deadly the process can be. That morning, Tanya and James were using a homemade fractal burning device. These DIY setups are often rigged together using parts salvaged from things like old microwaves or car batteries. While it might seem clever, it's incredibly dangerous. These devices can produce thousands of volts, easily enough to kill someone in seconds. Tragically, that's exactly what happened. During the process, both Tanya and James were fatally electrocuted. The electricity surged through their bodies, causing their hearts to stop almost immediately. It's believed that after they were already unconscious, their equipment sparked and ignited a fire that rapidly consumed the garage and spread through the home. When firefighters arrived on the scene, the house was already engulfed in flames. After extinguishing the blaze, responders discovered the bodies of Tanya and James in the garage, the point where the fire had started. Their location and the circumstances raised red flags for investigators. Why were both of them in the garage so early? Why did the fire start right where they were found? At first, the case was treated as suspicious. Lieutenant Mark Waggers from the Marathon County Sheriff's Office stated that all possibilities were being considered, including foul play. There were strange details, too. Tanya was found holding jumper cables. Wires were wrapped around her legs, and she had what looked like a head injury. Detective Eric Anderson began digging into their personal lives. Though Tanya and James weren't married, they had been in a long, rocky relationship. Tanya was also romantically involved with another man, Brad Harrison. That relationship had its own issues and had led to several arguments. Police started looking closely at Brad. He had past disputes with both Tanya and James, and a neighbor reported hearing shouting between Brad and James shortly before the fire. The neighbor even thought she heard something that sounded like gunshots. Brad had a warrant for an unrelated matter, so officers used the opportunity to bring him in. He was found at his job in Tomahawk, Wisconsin, sitting in his car under the influence. During questioning, Brad admitted to a recent argument with James, claiming James had damaged his car with a baseball bat. He denied harming either of them and said the noises the neighbor heard came from shouting, not a weapon. While Brad remained in custody, autopsy results came in. There was no soot in the victim's lungs, meaning they had died before the fire started. No signs of blunt force trauma or toxic substances were found. The marks on Tanya's body were determined to be from the fire, not violence. The wire around her legs likely became tangled during the experiment. A forensic pathologist then contacted investigators with a theory. This looked like a fractal wood-burning accident. Police returned to the garage and found microwave parts, batteries, and wiring consistent with that method. Friends confirmed that Tanya and James had been excited to try it. On April 21st, the deaths were ruled accidental. Brad was released. Authorities later issued warnings about the dangers of fractal wood burning. It has claimed dozens of lives, including another Wisconsin man, Matt Schmidt, in 2020. Tanya and James were simply trying something artistic, but one wrong move turned fatal. In 1974, Basil Brown, a health enthusiast from Croydon, England, made a name for himself in the weirdest way possible, by literally dying from drinking too much carrot juice. No, this isn't a joke or a rejected Monty Python sketch. Basil, a self-proclaimed health nut, was obsessed with natural remedies and extreme wellness habits long before it became trendy on Instagram. He believed that the key to good health was flooding his system with vitamins and nutrients, especially vitamin A. Unfortunately, he found out the hard way that even the most wholesome stuff on Earth can turn deadly if you go overboard. According to reports, Basil drank an estimated 10 gallons of carrot juice in just 10 days, which might make you wonder whether he was trying to become a carrot himself. Now, here's where it gets medically alarming. Carrots contain beta-carotene, which the human body converts into vitamin A. While vitamin A is important for your immune system, eyesight, and skin, there's a limit to how much your liver can handle. Basil didn't just tiptoe past that limit, he cannonballed over it. With his intense regimen of carrot juice and vitamin A tablets, it's estimated that he consumed more than 70 million units of vitamin A in that short period, over 300 times the recommended daily allowance. His skin began to turn an unsettling shade of orange, a condition known as carotenemia, which should have been a red or orange flag. But Basil wasn't about to be deterred. He was convinced that the more vitamins he shoved into his system, the better he'd feel. Spoiler alert, that's not how biology works. As the days went on, Basil's liver began to suffer under the toxic load. The liver is the body's detox center, and vitamin A, when taken in massive doses, becomes fatally toxic. His liver couldn't keep up, and he started experiencing symptoms of hypervitaminosis, A, nausea, abdominal pain, fatigue, and eventually liver failure. By the time he was found, the damage was irreversible. The coroner officially ruled his death as death by misadventure, caused by liver damage resulting from massive vitamin A overdose. Yes, Basil Brown became the first known man in the UK to die from an accidental vitamin overdose by carrot juice. Somewhere between the absurd and the tragic, he made history, just not the kind anyone wants. The media at the time was understandably baffled. Headlines painted him as the man who was killed by health food. Doctors used his case as a warning about the dangers of unregulated supplement intake. While most people in the 1970s were still figuring out what a vitamin was, Basil was taking enough to supply a small village. His story was so surreal that it's been referenced in bizarre death lists, medical oddities, and even dark comedy routines. Yet behind the ridiculous nature of it all lies a very serious truth. Too much of a good thing can be deadly. Basil Brown's legacy is a strangely orange-tinted reminder that health should be about balance, not obsession. So if you ever feel tempted to chug a blender full of carrots in the name of glowing skin or better eyesight, maybe think twice. Your liver will thank you. And somewhere out there, Basil's spirit might just be whispering, "Moderation, mate, moderation." On August the 14th, 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 took off from Larnaca, Cyprus, heading for Prague with a scheduled layover in Athens. What should have been a typical flight turned into one of aviation's most chilling disasters. Only moments after departure, a chain of preventable mistakes began turning the aircraft into a flying coffin. Soon after takeoff, the plane suffered a pressurization failure. Unbeknownst to the pilots, the cabin pressure system had been left in manual mode following a maintenance check and was never switched back to automatic. As the jet climbed into thinner air, the system failed to adjust the internal pressure, which should have remained at a safe, breathable level. At around 16,000 feet, the captain noticed unusual warning signals and contacted Helios's operations center, reporting what he believed were air conditioning problems. During a confusing exchange, engineers suggested reviewing the pressurization settings, but the advice wasn't fully understood. With the pressure dropping and oxygen thinning fast, neither the captain nor his co-pilot identified the real issue in time. By the time the aircraft reached 28,900 feet, all radio contact had ceased. The crew and passengers were slipping into unconsciousness, victims of hypoxia, a condition caused by lack of oxygen. At 34,000 feet, emergency oxygen masks dropped, but in the freezing cabin, where temperatures outside reached minus 50 degrees Celsius, it's unclear how many were able to use them. Inside the cockpit, both pilots were incapacitated. The co-pilot was slumped over and the captain's seat sat empty. With the plane now flying solely on autopilot, it continued on its programmed course, completely unmanned. Greek air traffic controllers tried and failed to re-establish communication as the jet drifted toward Athens. By 11:05 a.m., the Greek military scrambled two F-16s to intercept the Boeing 737. When the fighter jets approached, what they saw was horrifying. A lifeless co-pilot, dangling oxygen masks, and a motionless cabin. Then at 11:49, they witnessed something extraordinary. Flight attendant Andreas Prodromou entered the cockpit and took the captain's seat. Andreas had survived the hypoxia thanks to a portable oxygen tank. Despite only limited flight training, he attempted to save the aircraft and everyone on board. He managed to disengage autopilot and begin a descent. One of the fighter pilots reported seeing him briefly wave before one of the engines cut out due to fuel exhaustion. With the left engine gone, the plane began spiraling out of its holding pattern. 10 minutes later, the right engine failed as well. Out of fuel and with no remaining oxygen, Andreas eventually lost consciousness. At 12:03 p.m., Flight 522 crashed into a hillside near Grammatico, about 25 miles north of Athens, erupting in flames. All 121 people aboard perished, minus 115 passengers and 6 crew members. Forensic teams later determined many had still been alive but unconscious at the moment of impact. Most bodies were found strapped to their seats, frozen solid. Among the victims was the Sharupa family. Demos, who had returned to Cyprus from Australia, died along with his wife Margarita and their daughters, Sophia and Iana. Their youngest child, George, only 2 years old, had stayed behind with family and became the sole survivor of his household. Dubbed the ghost plane by the media, the crash shocked the world. Investigators traced the cause to human error, a maintenance oversight, and a fatal misunderstanding by the crew. Though several officials were eventually convicted of manslaughter by negligence, the emotional toll remains immeasurable. Andreas's final brave attempt may have prevented the aircraft from crashing into a populated area. His courage, though ultimately not enough to save those on board, likely spared countless lives on the ground. It was May 1st, 2019, in Evansville, Indiana. 15-year-old Mason Bogart had just come home from school. He hugged his dad, told his mom he loved her, and went upstairs to get ready for the evening. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Minutes later, his family's world changed forever. Mason was the youngest of 3 kids. He lived a happy, healthy life. He loved fishing, cooking, and had a sharp sense of humor. He did well in school and was known for being thoughtful and kind. When he first asked for a smartphone, his mom, Joanne, was careful. She set up parental controls, installed safety apps, and had regular talks with Mason about staying safe online. Mason wasn't on social media much, but he loved YouTube, especially outdoor and fishing videos. One day, Mason showed his mom a viral video. It looked silly, but it made her uneasy. She warned him that some trends online were dangerous and not everything was what it seemed. 2 weeks later, her worst fears came true. That night, Mason told his parents goodnight and went to take a shower. Moments later, they heard a loud thud. His father, Steve, who's also a firefighter, rushed upstairs. Mason was unconscious, a belt around his neck. He had no pulse and wasn't breathing. Steve began CPR immediately. Paramedics rushed Mason to Deaconess Hospital. Doctors put him on life support, but the damage was already done. Mason had suffered irreversible brain damage. On May 6th, his family made the hardest decision of their lives. Following Mason's wishes, they chose to donate his organs. He saved 5 lives. As Mason was wheeled down the hospital hallway, doctors, nurses, and staff lined the corridor in silent tribute. Soon after, Joanne shared on Facebook what she believed had happened. Mason had attempted the choking challenge, an online trend where kids restrict their airflow for a short high. Many filmed themselves doing it, but it can turn deadly in seconds. Later, they found a video on Mason's phone. In it, he smiled and called to his dog while trying the challenge. He didn't seem to grasp the danger. Though authorities couldn't officially confirm the trend as the cause of death, Joanne believed the algorithm had served the content to him. He hadn't searched for it. On May 10th, after Mason's funeral, the family released fireworks and lanterns in his memory. Donations poured into organizations Mason cared about, like the Indiana Donor Network and Wounded Warrior Project. But Joanne didn't stop there. She began speaking publicly about Mason's story. Other grieving parents soon reached out, families who had lost children to similar online trends. Joanne became a voice for change. In March, Indiana passed Mason's Education Act, which helps schools teach internet safety. She testified before Congress, holding up Mason's photo, calling out tech CEOs. In July, the U.S. Senate passed the Kids Online Safety Act, aimed at protecting minors and holding platforms accountable. Joanne also joined Project Liberty, a group trying to redesign the internet and even buy TikTok to prevent algorithmic harm. She believes if she'd had that kind of control earlier, Mason might still be here. Now she shares #Mason's message to spread awareness. Joanne continues to fight for safer digital spaces, hoping that no other parent ever has to endure the pain she lives with every day. In the annals of tragic and preventable accidents, the death of Gary Hoy remains one of the most bizarre and sobering. A respected corporate lawyer at the prominent Toronto law firm Holden Day Wilson, Hoy was known for his intellect, professionalism, and somewhat quirky enthusiasm for engineering and structural safety, an interest likely stemming from his background in engineering before pursuing law. On July 9, 1993, during an event welcoming articling students to the firm, Hoy decided to perform a demonstration he had reportedly done several times before, showcasing the strength of the building's glass windows by throwing himself against them. The office was located on the 24th floor of the Toronto Dominion Bank Tower, and the windows were made of heavy-duty glass designed to resist impact. According to witnesses, Hoy's first attempt resulted in him bouncing off the glass as expected. Emboldened, or perhaps eager to impress the students even further, he tried a second time. The glass itself didn't shatter. It stayed intact, just like he always said it would. But this time, the entire window frame gave way under the force. Gary Hoy was propelled through the opening and fell 24 stories to his death in the courtyard below. The incident was officially ruled an accident, but the unusual circumstances sparked immediate scrutiny and public astonishment. Structural engineers later explained that while the tempered glass could withstand blunt force, the frame that held it was never meant to endure the impact of a full-grown man repeatedly throwing himself against it. As engineer Bob Greer put it, "I don't know of any building code that would allow a 160-pound man to run up against a window and expect it to hold." Hoy's death sent shockwaves through the legal community, not only because of the unusual manner in which it happened, but also because it occurred in front of horrified colleagues and students. The event severely affected morale at Holden Day Wilson, which had already been struggling with internal issues, and the firm eventually collapsed and dissolved just a few years later in 1996. While some might be tempted to view Hoy's death as a darkly ironic anecdote, it is more accurately remembered as a tragic convergence of misplaced confidence, flawed design, and the tragic consequences of a momentary lapse in judgment. Over the years, Gary Hoy's story has been referenced in safety case studies, featured on television programs, and even cited in conversations about workplace culture and overconfidence. He was posthumously awarded a Darwin Award, which, though satirical in nature, underscored the heartbreaking absurdity of the incident. Yet behind the headlines and the labels was a man widely regarded as intelligent, driven, and dedicated to both his clients and his colleagues. The lessons from his untimely death extend far beyond the strange nature of the event. It serves as a reminder that even intelligent, capable professionals are not immune to misjudgment, and that workplace environments should always prioritize safety and critical thinking over spectacle. In many ways, Hoy's death has become a symbol of how easily trust in systems, whether legal, structural, or personal, can lead to devastating consequences if not tempered with caution. What makes the story all the more haunting is that Hoy didn't die because of recklessness or thrill-seeking, but because he believed in what he thought was a safe demonstration. It wasn't the glass that betrayed him, but the unseen weakness of the frame, the kind of detail that's easy to overlook until it's too late. On January 31st, 2000, Alaska Airlines Flight 261 took off from Puerto Vallarta on what was supposed to be a routine flight to Seattle, with a planned stop in San Francisco. But within hours, the trip turned into one of the most heartbreaking aviation disasters in U.S. history. The aircraft, a McDonnell Douglas MD-83, left the airport at 1:37 p.m. with 83 passengers and 5 crew members on board. Captain Ted Thompson and First Officer Bill Tansky, both highly experienced pilots, were in control. Not long into the flight, they encountered a technical issue with the plane's horizontal stabilizer, a vital component responsible for controlling the pitch of the aircraft. It wasn't moving as it should. The autopilot was disengaged, and the crew began flying manually while troubleshooting the issue. At this point, they hadn't declared an emergency, but Captain Thompson asked to divert to Los Angeles out of caution. At cruising altitude near 26,000 feet, the unthinkable happened. The aircraft suddenly pitched downward. Unknown to those on board, the jack screw assembly that managed the stabilizer had failed. Investigators would later find it had worn down due to poor maintenance and insufficient lubrication, a preventable and known problem. The pilots managed to pull the plane out of the first dive, regaining some control, and asked for an open stretch of ocean airspace to attempt different landing setups. But hope was short-lived. A second, more catastrophic failure occurred. The stabilizer jammed again, and this time the aircraft rolled upside down. It plummeted in an unrecoverable nose-down, losing power. At 4:21 p.m., the MD-83 slammed into the Pacific Ocean off the California coast at over 300 miles per hour. Rescue and recovery efforts launched immediately. Navy and Coast Guard crews scoured the ocean with sonar, submersibles, and ships near Anacapa Island. Wreckage and bodies were scattered across the water. Flight recorders recovered from the deep confirmed the horror. 9 minutes of chaos, courage, and helplessness. Among the 88 victims were entire families. David and Carolyn Clemenson, along with their children Coriander, Blake, Miles, and baby Spencer, died together. Their neighbors and close friends, the Pearsons, also perished. Parents and daughters, Rachel and Grace. 2 Seattle communities were left devastated, mourning multiple families at once. Also on board were Redmond residents Terry and Barbara Ryan, their sons James and Bradford Pat, and friends who had joined the trip to celebrate Jim's 30th birthday and Pat's recent college graduation. Jim, a flight attendant, was working that flight. A family friend described them as a tight-knit, joyful group who lived to support one another. Alaska Airlines employees Craig and Paul Polano, known for their contagious humor and festive holiday decorations, were lost too. So were wine columnist Tom Stockley and his wife Peggy, who had left behind a handwritten note for her elderly mother, discovered days later one last echo of love. These weren't just passengers. They were people full of life, children, parents, professionals, friends. Their deaths struck a national nerve not only because of the scale of loss, but because the crash was avoidable. Neglected maintenance triggered a series of mechanical failures that ended 88 lives in mere minutes. It wasn't just a tragedy. It was a catastrophe built on warnings ignored and families left forever changed. On March 2, 2024, in Lancaster, a quiet city in northwest England, 11-year-old Tommy Lee Gracie Billington was having a sleepover at a friend's house on Greenset Close. What started as a fun night with friends would end in absolute tragedy. Just hours later, Tommy Lee would lose his life after trying something he saw online. According to his devastated family, Tommy Lee had attempted a dangerous social media trend known as chroming. This trend involves inhaling fumes from household items like deodorants, nail polish remover, or spray paint to experience a brief high. But the risks are extreme. The chemicals can quickly cause hallucinations, blackouts, heart failure, or even stop someone's breathing within seconds. At some point during the sleepover, Tommy Lee inhaled one of these substances. He collapsed into cardiac arrest almost instantly and never regained consciousness. An emergency call was made at 12:04 p.m. that Saturday. Paramedics from the Northwest Ambulance Service arrived quickly, followed by the police. But by the time Tommy reached the hospital, it was too late. He was pronounced dead later that day. Initially, his death was listed as unexplained by authorities, but his family had no doubt what had caused it. Just days later, his grandmother, Tina Burns, shared the heartbreaking truth on social media. She explained that Tommy had died after trying the TikTok craze known as chroming, and that it happened in an instant. He was gone before anyone could react. Tommy Lee was remembered as a bright, energetic, and kind-hearted boy. He lived in Lancaster with his mother, Sherry. His father's family lived in nearby towns. After the tragedy, Sherry took to social media with a warning to other parents. She urged them to lock away household products and talk openly with their kids about the dangers of viral challenges. She wrote a desperate message: "Hide all the deodorants. This cost my son his life." While the term chroming originated in Australia, the act itself has been around for decades under other names like huffing or sniffing, but social media has brought it to a younger, more vulnerable audience. Now, it's spreading faster than ever before. Police didn't stop at the scene of the sleepover. In the days after Tommy's death, 2 adults were questioned. A 25-year-old man from Lancaster was arrested on multiple charges, including child neglect and possession of harmful substances. He was later released on bail. A 35-year-old woman was also interviewed and released under investigation. Though the cause of death remains officially unexplained, Tommy's family firmly believes chroming was the trigger. His grandmother, Tina, who works as a teaching assistant, has since started speaking in local schools, warning kids and parents alike. She's already heard from shocked families. Some removed social media apps from their children's phones immediately after learning about the trend. Experts have echoed the concerns. Social media analyst Hannah O'Donoghue-Hobbs called the trend deeply dangerous and warned how quickly harmful content spreads. Although TikTok has banned the word chroming, similar videos still exist under coded terms. One video demonstrating the method had over 700,000 views before it was taken down. Tommy's family is now advocating for stricter online protections and age limits for social media use. As Tina puts it, if her grandson's story can save even one child, then his memory will live on with purpose. Tommy Lee was just 11. One online challenge cost him everything. Michael Anderson. Godwin's death is one of those real-life stories that sound so absurd. They almost feel fictional, yet behind the bizarre headlines lies a tragic cautionary tale about fate, irony, and the strange turns life can take. In the early 1980s, Godwin was convicted of murder in South Carolina. He had taken a woman's life during what appeared to be a botched robbery, reportedly using an electric iron to commit the crime. The details were grim, and the justice system responded harshly. Godwin was sentenced to death by electric chair, but in a twist of legal fortune, that sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment after an appeal. It seemed that Godwin had dodged the ultimate penalty, narrowly escaping the state's chosen method of execution. But as fate would have it, electricity hadn't quite finished with him yet. Fast forward to 1989. Godwin was serving his life sentence at the Central Correctional Institution, one of South Carolina's most infamous prisons at the time. Inmates were permitted to have small televisions in their cells, but to keep the noise down, they were only allowed to use them with earphones. Godwin's earphones, unfortunately, had stopped working. Like many prisoners trying to make do with limited resources, he took it upon himself to fix them. But here's where the story takes its chilling turn. Seated naked on the metal toilet in his cell, a grounded steel surface, Godwin attempted to repair his headphones by biting into the exposed wire. The moment his mouth made contact with the live wire, electricity surged through his body and completed a circuit via the metal toilet. The result was instant and fatal. Michael Godwin died from electrocution, the very thing he had once been sentenced to suffer through legally. The irony of it all was not lost on the public or the press. Here was a man who had been sentenced to die by the electric chair, only to have that sentence lifted, only to die years later by an eerily similar method in a freak accident. It was almost as if fate had a dark sense of humor. Media outlets ran headlines that practically wrote themselves, calling it a homemade electric chair, and noting the cruel twist of poetic justice. But strip away the irony, and what remains is a deeply sad reality. A man, flawed and broken, who had once escaped death, ended up meeting it in the most unexpected and tragic way. His death wasn't the result of violence, vengeance, or malice. It was a fatal accident born out of desperation and poor judgment. There's something deeply human about the story of Michael Godwin. It's a reminder of how easily life can turn on something as small as a frayed wire. It's also a sobering commentary on prison conditions, where inmates often lack access to safe repair tools or basic maintenance. Had Godwin been given proper assistance or safer equipment, perhaps he'd still be alive today, living out his sentence behind bars rather than becoming a footnote in history books about strange and ironic deaths. His story continues to resurface across the internet and in books, always framed as a curiosity, an oddity, a punchline, but it's also a quiet tragedy, cloaked in shock value. The tale of Michael Godwin is not just about irony. It's about the thin line between survival and misfortune, and how sometimes, even when you escape death once, it can find a way to circle back in the most unexpected form. On October 13, 1972, a chartered plane went down deep in the Andes Mountains, sparking one of the most extraordinary and terrifying survival stories ever told. The aircraft, a Fairchild FH-227D, was flying from Montevideo, Uruguay to Santiago, Chile when disaster struck. What started as a routine flight turned into a nightmare at 3,600 meters above sea level in sub-zero conditions. On board were 45 people, including players from the old Christians Club rugby team, along with their friends, family, and supporters. From the outset, the odds were stacked against them. The plane was overloaded and underpowered, forced to navigate unstable weather over one of the world's highest mountain ranges. After being delayed overnight in Argentina, the plane took off the next afternoon. But as it approached the Andes, co-pilot Lieutenant Colonel Dante Hector Laguarara misjudged their position, thinking they had passed the Chilean town of Curaçao. He began a descent far too early, while the aircraft was still deep in the mountains. Moments later, the plane slammed into a ridge. The crash was devastating. The wings and tail broke off immediately, and the fuselage rocketed down a glacier at more than 350 kilometers per hour before it finally came to a violent stop. 12 people died instantly or within hours, including the pilot, Colonel Julio Cesar Ferradas, who was crushed on impact. Several passengers were flung from the wreckage. Among the survivors was 22-year-old Fernando Parado, who suffered a fractured skull and remained unconscious for 4 days. When he awoke, he was surrounded by death. His mother, sister, and many close friends were gone. The remaining 33 survivors were stranded in the frozen wilderness, completely cut off from the world. With no rescue in sight, they took shelter inside the wreckage. But food supplies were scarce and ran out within days. Nights were unbearably cold. They huddled together, punched each other to stay warm, and melted snow in bottles to drink. Their suffering grew worse when they heard, via a small transistor radio, that official search efforts had been called off after just 8 days. Facing starvation, the group made a grim and agonizing decision. They would survive by consuming the bodies of the dead. Many of them were deeply religious and only agreed after making a pact that their own bodies would be used if they didn't make it. Then disaster struck again. On day 17, an avalanche buried the fuselage, killing 8 more people. The survivors were trapped beneath snow, air running out. Parado managed to clear a hole in the cockpit, letting in enough oxygen to survive until the storm passed. Still, no help came. Weeks later, realizing they had no choice, they began planning an escape. Using the pilot's last known coordinates, they plotted a route west toward Chile. On December 12th, minus 61 days after the crash, Parado, Roberto Canessa, and another man set off into the mountains. They climbed Mount Sailor only to discover they were still deep in the Andes. The third man turned back, but Parado and Canessa pressed on, hiking nearly 54 kilometers over 7 grueling days. Eventually, they encountered a Chilean muleteer who understood their plight and sent for help. Parado and Canessa were rescued and taken to a nearby village where a recovery operation was launched. On December 22nd and 23rd, helicopters reached the crash site and rescued the 14 remaining survivors, minus 72 days after the crash. The ordeal made headlines worldwide, a powerful story of endurance and human will. Yet each survivor carried deep emotional wounds. For Fernando Parado, it wasn't just a tale of horror, but of friendship, courage, and the ultimate sacrifice that allowed him to live. It was the early morning of May 3, 2024, in Fredericksburg, Virginia. 18-year-old Michael Allen Bosworth Jr. and 2 of his friends were out filming content for TikTok. Like many teens, they were taking part in a viral challenge called Ding Dong Ditch, knocking on someone's door or ringing their doorbell, then running away before the person answers. It's meant to be harmless. This time it wasn't. Michael was a senior at Massaponax High School. He played football, lacrosse, and wrestled. He was outgoing, well-known, and looking forward to prom that night with his girlfriend of 3 years, but he would never get the chance. Around 3 a.m., the boys approached a home on Mackenzie Lane. It belonged to 27-year-old Tyler Chase Butler. Michael knocked. Seconds later, as they turned to run, Butler opened fire. He told police he believed someone was trying to break in. Without issuing a warning or even checking who was outside, he grabbed his gun and fired multiple times as the teens fled. Michael was hit in the torso. One friend was grazed by a bullet, and the other got away uninjured. Deputies from the Spotsylvania County Sheriff's Office responded after receiving a report of a possible break-in and shots fired. When they arrived, they found Michael critically wounded. He was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't make it. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival, just hours before he was supposed to be at prom. At first, investigators treated the incident as an attempted burglary. Butler claimed he thought someone was trying to force entry into his house, but that story began to fall apart quickly. When officers spoke with the surviving teens and reviewed videos on their phones, the truth began to surface. One of Michael's friends explained they had been filming themselves playing Ding Dong Ditch at several houses that night. It was just for laughs and social media likes. One of the phones even had footage from earlier pranks that clearly showed they were never trying to break in, just running away after knocking. On May 6th, authorities arrested Tyler Butler. He was charged with second-degree murder, malicious wounding, and 2 counts of using a firearm during a felony. He was held without bond at Rappahannock Regional Jail. The loss shook the community. Michael's girlfriend, Melinda Garcia, still attended prom that evening. She wore his bow tie wrapped around her wrist. On Instagram, she shared photos and wrote that he didn't deserve what happened. A few days later, students gathered on the football field where Michael once played, releasing black and blue balloons in his honor. Grief counselors were made available at school, but nothing could undo what had happened. Michael was set to graduate on May 13th. Instead, his classmates crossed the stage without him. A memorial service and celebration of life were held later that month. His parents, siblings, and friends remembered him as joyful, full of life, and on the verge of his future. The shooting drew national attention. It reignited debates about guns, self-defense laws, and how innocent pranks can spiral into deadly situations. Just like that, one split-second decision ended a life that had barely begun. Michael Bosworth Jr. was only 18 years old. One night changed everything. This is one of those tragic stories that sound almost too bizarre to be real, yet it is. In 1982, David Grundman, a 27-year-old man, ventured into the Arizona desert near Lake Pleasant with a shotgun and what seemed like a reckless idea. While many go into the desert to appreciate its quiet beauty or engage in outdoor recreation, David was there for a much more destructive purpose. He and his friend were engaging in an activity informally known as cactus plugging, which essentially meant shooting at large cacti to see them collapse. It was an act of vandalism masked as entertainment. David had already destroyed a smaller cactus and, encouraged by the result, turned his attention to a towering saguaro cactus standing approximately 26 feet tall. These ancient plants are symbols of the American Southwest, often living for over a century. That particular cactus had likely been growing since before David was even born. He fired at one of its massive arms, not realizing the danger he was putting himself in. As the bullet struck, the arm began to loosen, and moments later it broke off. This was not a harmless fall. The limb, weighing around 500 pounds, plummeted downward with force and struck David directly, but the incident did not end there. The main trunk of the cactus, now destabilized by the gunfire, also collapsed. Both the limb and the trunk came down, crushing him and resulting in his immediate death. His friend, standing nearby, witnessed the horrifying scene unfold, but could do nothing to prevent it. What began as a misguided attempt at fun had turned fatal in seconds. It is important to understand the nature of the saguaro cactus. These plants are not just iconic desert scenery. They are protected under Arizona law due to their ecological importance and the slow pace at which they grow. Saguaros can take decades to develop arms and over 100 years to reach full height. Damaging or destroying one is considered a felony and carries severe penalties. Grundman's act was not just dangerous. It was illegal and disrespectful to the desert environment. Sadly, he paid the ultimate price for underestimating the very force of nature he chose to confront. His death has since become a cautionary tale, used to highlight both the unpredictability of the natural world and the consequences of careless human behavior. The strange circumstances of his death have drawn widespread attention over the years, often appearing in unusual deaths lists and Darwin Award compilations. While some may treat it as a darkly humorous anecdote, it serves as a sobering reminder of the risks we take when we interact with nature irresponsibly. What seemed like a harmless plant was, in truth, a towering structure capable of inflicting serious harm when provoked. Grundman's story is often retold not only because of its oddity, but also because of the deep lesson it conveys. Even something as seemingly benign as a cactus can become deadly under the right conditions. His story has inspired songs, articles, videos, and even animated retellings. But beyond the sensationalism lies a powerful message. The desert is not a playground, and the organisms within it deserve respect. As we explore nature, we must also recognize its power and act with responsibility. Grundman's death was preventable. It was not caused by the unpredictability of nature, but by a human decision to challenge it without understanding the risks. His story remains a tragic example of what can go wrong when we treat the natural world as a target instead of a treasure. On the night of January 29, 2025, tragedy unfolded in the skies above the Potomac River near Washington, D.C., when a mid-air collision between a passenger jet and a military helicopter claimed the lives of all 67 people aboard. The horrifying event stunned the nation and left a permanent scar on the capital's airspace. Flight 5342 had taken off from Wichita, Kansas, carrying 60 passengers and a crew of 4. It was nearing the end of its journey, just minutes from landing at Reagan National Airport, when the unthinkable happened. Simultaneously, a Black Hawk helicopter conducting a routine night vision training exercise was flying nearby, crewed by 3 personnel from Fort Belvoir. Both aircraft were in contact with air traffic control. Yet, somehow, a deadly chain of errors, a breach in restricted airspace, miscommunication, and radar blind spots led to the disaster. At 8:47 p.m., just hundreds of feet above the river and less than a mile from the runway, the 2 aircraft collided. A violent fireball erupted in the night sky, captured live by a riverfront webcam. The commercial jet, a 20-year-old regional aircraft, had recently been added to the Kansas-DC route. The Black Hawk, typically used to transport high-level government officials, was flying with no passengers, only its crew. Despite the vastly different missions, their paths fatally crossed. Among those lost on Flight 5342 were 28 individuals linked to the U.S. figure skating community. The group, including young athletes, coaches, and family members, had just attended the U.S. Figure Skating National Development Camp. Their dreams of Olympic glory were destroyed in an instant. The Skating Club of Boston suffered devastating losses, including talented teens Spencer Lane and Jenna Han, their mothers, and world-renowned Russian coaches Eva Shishkova and Vadim Nomov, who had devoted their post-competitive careers to mentoring American youth. The aircraft crew, too, left behind stories of dedication and hope. Captain Jonathan Campos, 34, was a seasoned pilot known for his focus and passion. His co-pilot, 28-year-old Sam Lilly, was newly engaged and had quickly gained respect within the airline. Flight attendants Ian Epstein, remembered for his joyful spirit, and Denasia Elder, a mother of two and beacon of strength for her family, were also lost. Other passengers included people like Grace Maxwell, a college student studying biomedical engineering, who had just returned from her grandfather's funeral. Lawyers Sarah Lee Best and Elizabeth Keyes, both known for their work in justice reform, were among the deceased, along with Howard University professor Kaya Duggins, a prominent civil rights attorney whose death sent shockwaves through the legal community. On board the Black Hawk were 3 military service members: Captain Rebecca Lobach, a 28-year-old night certification; Chief Warrant Officer Andrew Eves, 39, the evaluator overseeing the flight; and Staff Sergeant Ryan O'Hara, 29, a new father whose loss left a young family grieving. In the aftermath, the National Transportation Safety Board released a preliminary report pointing to a dangerously narrow vertical gap between the helicopter's authorized air corridor and the jet's final descent path. The FAA was heavily criticized for failing to act on multiple past warnings of near misses in the same area. At the time of the crash, only one air traffic controller was overseeing both the helicopter and some fixed-wing traffic, a clear sign of systemic understaffing. By February 4th, recovery teams had retrieved the wreckage and identified all 67 victims. Across the country, grief and disbelief rippled through families, sports communities, and military circles. The legacy of this disaster is not just in the lives lost, but in the urgent call for change that must follow.